Today we will be discussing Chapter 1, Section 2, which is found on page 16 of your book. It is titled The Environment in Society. This section will focus on the relationship between economics and the environment. When you finish this portion of the lesson, you should be able to describe the tragedy of the commons, explain the law of supply and demand, list three differences between developed and developing countries, and explain what sustainability is and describe why it is a goal of environmental science. To start with, I want you to brainstorm of ways that economic forces influence what we do to the environment. Write your prompt and your response in your science journal. Here are some ways I listed. When you go to the grocery store and buy food, if you buy frozen vegetables, it's packed in a plastic bag. What about when you buy soap? It is in paper or plastic. How about when you buy aluminum foil? Where does the aluminum foil come from? All of these products affect our environment one way or another. The Tragedy of the Commons is an essay that an ecologist, Garrett Hardin, wrote in 1968. He argued that the main difficulty in solving environmental problems is the conflict between the short-term interests of the individual and the long-term welfare of society. In other words, he is basically saying men are greedy and they want to pursue their own best interests. The example he used was the commons, or an area of land that belonged to a whole village. Today, we really don't have common land in agricultural sense. The commons today would be equivalent to resources such as the atmosphere, oceans, rivers, or any other shared resources that are not formally regulated. At the time Garrett Hardin wrote his essay, it was in the best interest of the individual to put as many animals in the commons as possible. However, if too many animals grazed on the commons, they destroyed the grass. Once the grass was destroyed, everybody suffered because no one could raise animals in the commons. The commons were eventually replaced by closed fields owned by individuals. Owners were now careful not to put too many animals on their land because overgrazing wouldn't allow them to raise as many animals next year. Hardin's point being that someone or some group must take responsibility for maintaining a resource or else it will become depleted. Hardin's point can be applied to our modern commons, natural resources. Humans live in societies, and in societies, we can solve environmental problems by planning, organizing, considering the scientific evidence, and proposing a solution. The solution may be to override the short-term interests of the individual and improve the environment for everyone in the long run. The law of supply and demand is a law of economics that states as the demand for a good or service increases, the value of the service also increases. An example is the United States copper supply. If you look at the graph, you can see how the copper supply has decreased over the years and the cost of copper has risen. You can take a closer look at this graph on page 17 of the book when you go back to read this section. The cost of environmental solutions can be high. A cost-benefit analysis balances the cost of an action against the benefits one expects from it. The results depend on who is doing the analysis. For example, regulating fishing may be costly to the fishing industry, but to a nearby community, the price may well be worth it. Often, environmental regulations are passed on to the consumer or taxpayer. One of the costs of any action is the risk of an undesirable outcome. Risk assessment is a tool that helps us create cost-effective ways to protect our health and our environment. To come up with an effective solution to an environmental problem, the public must perceive the risk accurately. If you look at the map, you will see where developed and developing countries are located. The unequal distribution of wealth and resources around the world influence the environmental problems and solutions a society can make. Developed countries have higher incomes, slower population growth, diverse industrial economies, and stronger social support. Developing countries have lower average incomes, simple agricultural-based communities, and rapid population growth. Almost all environmental problems can be traced back to two root causes. In some areas, human population is growing too quickly for the local environment to be able to support everyone. People are using up, wasting, or polluting many natural resources faster than they can be replaced or cleaned up. Local population pressures occur when the population in an area grows rapidly, resulting in not enough natural resources for the people living there to live a healthy, productive life. In severely overpopulated regions, forests are stripped bare, topsoil is exhausted, and animals are driven to extinction. In these areas, malnutrition, starvation, and disease can be constant threats. In developing countries, millions of people are starving, yet this is where the human population is growing the fastest. Food production, education, and job creation cannot keep pace with the population growth, so each person gets fewer resources as time goes by. To support the higher quality of life, developed countries are using much more of Earth's resources. These pie charts show you developed nations are using the majority of the world's resources, even though they make up only 20% of the world's population. The rate of consumption creates more waste and pollution per person than in developing countries. This chart is found on page 19 of the book. It shows you the consumption trend indicators of development for the US, Japan, Mexico, and Indonesia. Why do you think people in the developed countries live longer? Look at the other characteristics listed. Does the living space tell you anything about the conditions that people live in? Note, Japan has a high standard of living, but also has the highest population density. What does the waste generated per person tell you about the differences between developed and developing nations? An ecological footprint is calculations that show the productive area of the earth needed to support one person in a particular country. An ecological footprint estimates the land used for crops, grazing, forest products, and housing. It also includes the ocean area used to harvest seafood and the forest area needed to absorb the air pollution caused by fossil fuels. An ecological footprint is one way to express the differences in consumption between nations. People on either side of an environmental issue may feel passionate about their cause and can distort information to mislead people about the issue. Research done by scientists are often used to make political points or is misinterpreted to support controversial data. Also, the economic influences of an environmental issue may be oversimplified or understated. And to complicate matters still, the media often sensationalizes environmental issues. For these reasons and others, you must use your critical thinking skills when making decisions about environmental issues. Remember a few things as you explore environmental science further. First, be prepared to listen to many viewpoints over a particular issue. Second, investigate the source of the information you encounter. And third, gather all the information you can before drawing a conclusion. Sustainability is the condition in which human needs are met in such a way that a human population can survive indefinitely. Sustainability is a key goal of environmental science. A sustainable world is not unchanging. Technological advances in human civilizations continue to be productive. However, our current world is not sustainable. The developed countries are using resources faster than they can be replaced. Achieving a sustainable world requires everybody's participation, including individual citizens, industry, and the government. This includes each and every one of us.